I'm going to be replacing a few frets on this acoustic guitar and then take you through a fret dressing. So I've already got a couple of frets ready. So I'm just going to take you through the process of fretting a bound fingerboard. And first of all, StewMac makes these cutters that will cut the tang. So I'm just going to take that in. I don't know how well you can see that, but it'll cut the tang. And after that, the tang is not perfectly gone, so I just take it to a little filing, and I'll take you through that. You don't want to go too deep because you don't want to create a little ridge. Just want to get rid of that tang. Then the idea is just to take the corner away. And again, try to keep the clippings off the mat. I'll be taking them off later. Another good thing to do is to just take a marker and mark basically one side. I always mark the treble side, so that way I always know what I'm working with. The taper of a guitar neck is usually like 1 degree. So what I've done is created a couple of kerfs in a piece of basically radiused board, maple. And so I'm going to put it in the treble slot, and that way it'll be cut in the same direction as the board. I'm going to check it against this fret here, 3rd fret, and I seem to be in the right direction. The other ones are quite beveled, so I'm just going to bevel it a tiny bit more. And then I'm going to take my diamond file and soften that up and check it again. And that's looking good from here. Trying not to get in the way of the camera. And I'm just going to knock the little corners out a tiny bit with a soft file. Then I'm going to take a Dremel and just polish up what I just did. And I don't know how well you can see, but that's quite shiny at this point. Next, what we want to do is to just place that in the appropriate spot on the treble side and give a mark with a fine marker roughly where it's going to be on the bass side. And what I do here is find the slot of the fingerboard of the rosewood and just mark along that edge. When you take it away, you'll see that there is a mark right there as well. So let's cut this down and take the fret tang nipper and cut away at the tang. Again, the tang needs to be filed away. Again, we'll soften that corner so that when it flattens out, it won't press against the binding. And let's see kind of where it's at. Again, our treble side was correct. And we're not too far off there, I guess. So I'll put it in the bass side. And we'll file the bevel on that. So again, the bass side. Let's see roughly where we're at. So it's just a matter of going back and forth with this. And I usually start on the wider side, so if I accidentally kind of file one a little too short, I could still use it for here, for instance, because it goes smaller at the peg head end and wider at the tongue end. This is a diamond file. See where it fits. Sometimes I'll just take a tiny bit like that, as I can see, you know, the exact taper of the neck at this point. So let's see what that looks like. Seems pretty good. Again, we'll soften the edges. Take my Dremel to it again. With Stumax Extra Fine Compound. It does shine it up pretty good. Double check it. My head will probably be in the way here a bit. Basically, it's right in the spot we need it. Once we press it in, that should look great. What we're going to do now is set the frets in, but firstly we're going to create a tiny bevel with a triangular file. And that'll help the frets seat a little better. Making sure that you keep the file above the binding, because you don't want to file anything within the binding. Just the rosewood. So to get the other side done, we're just going 3/4. We'd have to turn the guitar around and file a tiny bit there, but not filing the binding. With the tiniest of bevel created to help seat the fret, we're just gonna now put in a bit of water. This will help lubricate how the fret seats in and swell the wood fiber a bit. We're not gluing these in. The other option is to glue frets in. Let's install a fret or two. Again, I can see from my line that I created that this is the treble side and that's the bass side. Again, marker line. Trying to line these up so that they fit perfectly. Now I'm going to take it's a 14 degree radius neck, but I'm going to take a 10 degree radius caul, I guess, and just flatten these in. Hopefully you can still see. And because this is radiused, I think it's actually, I think I got a 7 1/4 in there. Because this is radiused more than the radius of the fingerboard, because this caul is, it'll seat both ends in first. And then the idea is to take a flatter caul and it'll put the tangs kind of sideways a little bit within the kerf. So the fret should stay much better this way than if it was even hammered in. So yeah, that was a 7 1/4. I'm just going to flatten it a bit with a 10. And onward to a 14. You don't want to squeeze these in too hard. You don't want to flatten out the rosewood. You'll get a feel for how they seat the more you do it. When I jig a guitar in the early wine neck jig, I usually tip it to about 84 degrees. It puts the guitar in a kind of playing position, as you can see here. It depends, you know, if the player's really skinny, I guess you might want to put it at a 90, or somebody's got a bit of a belly, you would tip it a tiny bit. But I usually put it around 84 degrees on the dial of the vise there. And then zero in my dial so that I know when I take off the strings where to reset the whole thing. So when I tighten the truss rod to get the neck straight, and that's how we want to work with it on the early wine neck jig here, I use a notched straight edge, and all the notches go over the frets and read the fingerboard. I do like at the first fret to see a little bit of light when I pass a light on the bottom side, I guess, of the notch straight edge. I like to see at least 1/1000th of an inch there. So the neck is slightly backbowed. Every time I've set it slightly backbowed, it seems like whenever I test my fret dressing frets against fingerboard, they seem to be more even. I usually put the notch straight edge down and want to see a little bit of light at the first fret there. So ever so slightly backbowed. When adjusting a neck on the early wine neck jig, we want to remove the strings. And as we remove the strings, you can see the dials are changing on us. And so after the strings are removed, the idea is to manipulate the neck so that we have the same readings we had when we perfectly set it up. When strapping a guitar to the early wine neck jig, I like to put some leather to help protect the guitar. Sometimes you can put some paper, but old leather strap that you cut up is a great idea. And I'll put a little bit of leather here too. So as I raise the neck, you can see that the dial is finding its way back to where we were. In this case, this dial is pretty close. That one's still off. So if we pull on this, you can see that that one will move. So the idea with this strap is that it will pull on it. So we will raise that one and tighten that one a little at a time for each so that we zero in our dials. They will move a bit as the guitar adjusts. They're both basically at zero there. So then I'm going to raise these rods. The rods will maybe move it 0.5 of an inch or so. You just want to kind of help support the fingerboard. But you may have to move these again a tiny bit and just help them settle onto the rods a bit. Good idea would be to double check. Right now we're dialed in well, and with the notched straight edge we should be basically as flat as I had checked that we were moments ago. And we are. The next step in the process after the fingerboard's been all taped is to just mark the tops of the frets, and then you'll have some idea of what you're filing away at. So just a blue marker. Frets 2, 3, 4, and 5 are new. Oddly enough, I've never quite seen this before, but fret 1 wasn't terribly dented. The frets are about 38, 39 thousandths of an inch high, so I'm hoping to remove a couple of thousandths of an inch in the process of dressing them flat. And the early line net jig is all set, zeroed in. Take a straight edge and put some sandpaper on it and just file it. So here I've still got a little bit of a dent in the first fret. That was maybe a little more dented than I thought, but sub 6 and 7 I guess still have some dents. And there was a little bit of a height here at the 14th fret, which is not uncommon, and then a drop at the tongue. So all that marking of the frets shows me that at this point. Where it's a 14-inch radius, we want to kind of file away at it as if it was a cylinder, not a cone. So as I bring this over this way, this end will extend out a tiny bit, and that way this end will extend out that way a tiny bit too, because if we didn't, we would be kind of flattening this end a bit more, kind of like a cone at that point. Again, still not filing away too much of these ones. Seems like 18 and 20 have a tiny bit on the treble side that's filing away. 15, not all. 14 seemed to be really high. This area must have had a bit of a, I guess this whole area here seemed pretty high. But anyway, still some more filing to do. After leveling everything off, I re-blued the top of the frets with a marker. And StewMac makes a file called a Z file. And it's not rounded, and the idea is that it would shave away at the edges a bit more while still leaving the top as a little blue mark. So that way you're not readjusting, I guess, what you've already done. That should be pretty precise. So for instance here, I don't know how we'll see for sure on that camera, but this one file, when you turn it one way and then the other, will file away at each side but still preserve that top blue line. So that's what I'm going to do now. And it does a great job. Diamond filed. After using the Z file to narrow the frets again, I'm going to take a regular diamond concave file to get rid of that little blue line and blend the sides with the top. Very little needs to be filed here, and I don't press too hard on the file at all. This is a 300 grit file. And there is a 600 grit file that I have. I sometimes soften the tops with this one as well. On the way to using micro mesh papers in the 600, 800, and 1200 range after that. After crowning the frets with 600 grit diamond file, I'll take my fret rocker, and you put it, the idea is to put it between 3 frets, and if there's some rocking, of course you got to keep the fret rocker in the same direction as the frets, because if you take it this way, of course it's going to rock, but if you put it in the same direction than the frets and it doesn't rock, it means it's all even. And so most of the time when you do exactly what I did, everything should be even, but there's occasionally this one here, right here, there was this one little spot here that when I put it to the 3 frets, it had rocked a tiny bit. So now it doesn't rock, it's solid, so I had just taken a tiny bit more there, but otherwise if you did what you were supposed to, the fret dressing should have been fine, but it's great to double check. At this point, I'm going to be taking, that was a 600 diamond, but I'm going to take a 600 micro mesh paper, and what I've done with a round file is filed a little indent there and 2 indents on each side on the other side. So when we polish the frets, it'll stay on the fret a little bit better. I'll just show you on the 9th fret here. So when I take this to one side, there's a little notch I can feel that the fret feels as well. And so one side of each, and then the center has a notch where I can go down the top. So if I do a similar amount of strokes on all the frets, and incrementally go up to 800 and then 1200, they'll be very shiny. After using the micro mesh papers, there are these polishing papers, and the pink one would be a 4000 grit, the mint one would be a 6000 grit. If I remember correctly, the white one is a 12,000 grit. So the idea is to just rub it back and forth and polish your frets that way. I'm going to be using a Dremel later on, so I'm kind of lucky I've got that ability to polish. Now I'm going to continue polishing the frets with just a buffing wheel and some extra fine compound from a Stumac. Now I've got all the frets shined up. They're perfectly even with one another. Got a little bit of lemon oil on the fingerboard. Frets 2, 3, 4, 5 are new. Shiny new frets on this guitar.